हेलो फ्रेंड्स, केजी क्लासेस में आपका स्वागत है। आज हम आपको जॉफ्री चौसर के लॉन्ग आंसर के बारे में बताएंगे। क्वेश्चन है, राइट ए नोट ऑन चौसर एज द क्रोनिकलर ऑफ द 14th सेंचुरी इंग्लैंड और ए क्रॉस सेक्शन ऑफ इंग्लिश लाइफ इन द 14th सेंचुरी। इज दिस एन एप्ट description of the prologue? Or Chaucer's work reflects his century not in fragment but completely discussed? Or Chaucer stand in much the same relation to the life of his time as Pope does to the earlier phases of the 18th century and Tennyson to the Victorian era? Discuss. Answer. In the prologue to the Canterbury Tales, Chaucer has given a picture of the 14th century social and religious conditions. The prologue is in fact a cross-section of English life in the 14th century. Chaucer was a true literary artist who realized that the calling of the poet is to faithfully reflect the age in his works. In this aspect, he can be compared to Pope in the 18th century and Tennyson in the Victorian age. Pope's essay on man, essay on criticism, the rape of the lock, and Dunciad are all expression of the literary tendencies, fashion and manners of his age. Likewise, for nearly half a century, Tennyson was not only a man and a poet, he was a voice, the voice of a whole people, expressing in acoustics melody their doubts and their faith, their griefs and their triumphs. His Locke's luxury hall, Princess, the palace of art, Maud, Adalices of the king, and In Memoriam, all bear witness to the above observation of W.J. Long. Like Pope and Tennyson, Chaucer too is the voice of his age. He represents the age not in fragment but as a whole. In this respect, he differs from his such contemporaries as Wycliffe, Gower, and Langland. Wycliffe concentrated on religious reformation. Gower expressed the fear of the wealthier classes on account of the peasants' revolt, and Langland highlighted the rampant corruption in the church, but it was reserved for Chaucer to take within the range of his brush the whole of the English society. In this work, he showed the world as it did exist, the England of his days, a world of reality, a world various and beautiful, hitherto kept away from literature. Chaucer gives us a microcosm of English society in the prologue. All classes of people are here represented except the highest and the lowest. The 14th century English society could be broadly divided into three groups. First, there were people representing agricultural, feudal, and chivalric classes. Second, those associated with the church and religions. And third were those who represented various trades and profession and who were the symbols of the growing urbanization in the medieval England. The chivalric spirit of the age of Chaucer is represented by the knight, the squire, and the yeoman. The knight represents the fading chivalry of the Middle Age. He has fought in as many as 15 mortal battles. He is a symbol of all knightly virtue. The squire is the representative of the newly emerging chivalrous spirit. Being a young man, he cherishes youthful feelings. Consequently, he can not only jest but also compose song and dance. The yeoman is a sincere servant of the knight. The franklin and the reeve are the representative of the age-old feudalism. The franklin holds land for his lord, what's more, probably in his own right. The reeve acts as a manager of an estate and makes full use of his power for his own profit. The plowman is the lowest in the feudal hierarchy. He is a sincere labourer of the field. Eight of Chaucer's pilgrims represents the ecclesiastical class. They are the prioress, her chaplain, the monk, the friar, and the clerk, the parson, the summoner, and the pardoner. With the exception of the clerk of Oxford and the parson, all the ecclesiastical characters represents the decaying religious conditions of the 14th century England. The monk does not bother for his calling. He is more worldly than religious. The prioress is an affected person who cares more about fine manners than about austerity. Her chaplain is a lusty fellow. The friar is acquainted more with rich people than with the poor and the sick. The summoner argues that so long as a person has money, he need not fear the curse of the archdeacon. The clerk of Oxford is a sincere seeker of knowledge. He loves books more than worldly things. The parson is a true well-wisher of his parishioners. The trade and other professions are represented by the doctor, the sergeant of law, the municipal, the miller, the merchant, the haberdashers, the weaver, the carpenter, the dyer, of four taken collectively, and of course the wife of Bath, who also represents a class of women. All these characters represent their respective professions. Popular in Chaucer's time, the marine trade, however, is represented by the shipman. Beside the people belonging to the various classes of society, Chaucer has referred to various contemporary incidents and social conditions. The most important event was the Black Death, which struck England 4 times. One half of the population, including two-thirds of the London people, had been killed. Chaucer throws one light on the inadequacy of the medical science, which depends more on astronomy than on medical diagnosis. The doctor, through a perfect practitioner, is most careful about money which he collected during pestilence. The evils present in the church have been sufficiently referred to by Chaucer. The monk cares more about pleasure than about of life of austerity. Likewise, the friar, the pardoner, and the summoner all are most corrupt and impious persons. Extravagance in dress was highly prevalent in Chaucer's England. The love of display is shown in several characters. The knight's horses are decked out with more finery than is the knight himself, with curious harness as in saddles and bridles, cruppers and breastplates covered with precious clothing, and with bars and plates of gold and silver. The squire is embroidered, and his garments are all full of refreshed flowers, white and recede. The monk wears a coat, the sleeves of which are bordered with fur of the finest quality. The wife of Bath wants to be seen by all. Her kerchiefs are full fine of lux texture and weigh 10 pounds. All the characters are shown to wear clothes according to their rank, position, and profession. Then there are also references to food habits of the pupil. The monk loves a roast swan. The franklin keeps his table always ready with partridge and fish. The cook loves London ales. He can cook chickens with the marrow bones. The summoner loves garlic and onion. The pilgrims have a special love of wealth and gold. This shows the growing commercialism and materialistic greed of the people, particularly the religious class. Thus, it may safely be said about the prologue that it is a cross section of the 14th century England. There is much of medieval atmosphere and color in it. It may be read as a word picture of medieval society, but the prologue should be read with a different angles. To Chaucer is a poet of profound insight, the far-reaching vision. He is also the morning star of Renaissance in England. He discerned the break up of medieval society with keen observation. The prologue has its supreme interest today because it is the picture of the vanishing age for which a class of readers might have a nostalgic yearning, and also because it reveals the coming age. The widespread corruption of the medieval church has its own significance apart from the rottenness of the church itself. It signifies a revolt against the spirit of the Middle Age. Chaucer has tolerant spirit and extraordinary faith in humanity, and so he can portray the realities of the age with an unperturbed spirit. The monk makes his earthly life his chief objective. The friar discards the bow of poetry. The Franklin identifies happiness with the pursuit of sensual pleasure. All this is significant. The spirit of otherworldliness which characterized and distinguished the Middle Age had lost its attraction in Chaucer's age. This is the new spirit reflected in the prologue. It marks the advent of the modern age. Next question है, write a note on Chaucer's humor and irony. Answer. Chaucer is the first great English humorist. He treats his fellow men with a liberal and indulgent attitude. He laughs as he lashes. The Canterbury Tales have enough to this humorous attitude. In the words of Henry Newbolt, the stroke of honorable laughter resound on all sides. The storyteller laughs at the stories and at each other. The great storyteller laughs at them and at himself, but the laughter with which he injects us in not the laughter of disdain or of horseplay. It is the subtle and almost silent laughter which comes from recognizing human frailties and the curious deviation which they cause in human life. The subtle and many-sided humor of Chaucer is always sympathetic. It is the outcome of his keen observation of man and manners of everyday life. This amused observation is brought out in the description of the squire's locks, which seem to have been laid in press. The head of wife of Bath weighed 10 pounds. The reef's thin legs, the franklin's weakness for sharp sauce, and the monk and the friar are amusing. He does not treat with disdain those whose foolishness he has fathom, nor does he turn away in disgust from the rascal whose tricks has detected. Lewis, he exposes the evils of the church with a good-humoured laugh. He makes fun of the individual belonging to the church. Chaucer's humour has a wide range. It ranges from delicate shades of good-natured shyness to downright ridicule which raises an irresistible laughter. There is fun in the free course adventure. Here is the joy of irresponsibility, the occasional fit of drunkenness, which is part of the health of a sane man. Sometimes his humour is sly. Chaucer's humour has a freshness of outlook and is marked by tolerance, charity, forgiveness, and sympathy. There is always a tinge of pity for the fiveless of mankind. The smile or laugh that he raises is conspicuously genial. The tales exist the weakness of human nature, but Chaucer never attacks them as vices. There is honorable laughter when the storyteller laughs at the stories and at each other. The author himself laughs at them and at himself, but this laughter is the subtle, silent laughter born out of the recognition of natural human weakness. Even in the portraits of the pardoner and the summoner, there is no magisterial or personal feeling. In the portrait of the wife of Bath, we see the service and tyrannical qualities of a typical woman, but there is no trace of anger, so no sign of harshness. He sympathizes with the wife in her most dominant characteristics, the zest for life. But Lord Christ, when that it remembereth me up on my youth and on my jollity, it tickleth me about my heart, wrote unto this day. It doth min hearte vote that I have had my world as in my time. There is nothing morbid about Chaucer's humour. His humour is the expression of his joyous sense of existence, his own vibrant vitality, his many-sided interest in life and its multiple manifestation, and his faith in humanity gives a unique quality to his humour. He is capable of remarkable detachment. He can survey the motley scene of life with an amused smile and a tolerant gaze. He is first of all a disinterested onlooker, and he can therefore paint things and persons as they are. His disinterested view of things is aided by his minute observation. The detail he portrays with an eye to their pictorial and comical effects produce the most striking impression upon the reader. The very essence of his subtle but delicious humor is contained in the presentation of characters. Chaucer has his own way of dealing with human characters, which makes an immense advance upon the Romance writer who gave us only shadowy abstraction, not living personages. Shakespeare has certainly a still subtler art in presenting human character, but otherwise very few, whether poets, dramatists, or novelists, have been able to improve upon Chaucer's method. His sense of humor is best exhibited in his pictures of living men and women. He is a master of humor, and he knows well that speech, action, and movement of living men and women are the real living source of humor, and so his first problem was to put on the stage living men and women of his own age, whom naturally he knew best. Thanks, best of luck.